to look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
Okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to, moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern
I'm pretty
cities.
sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
It's not
Okay.
changed, but I'm
So,
pretty sure the movement by Russia is
has
Russia's
NATO,
decision.
if NATO has moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved, not
NATO
because
is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security
Watch this.
alliance.
Watch.
Unfortunately, for 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So
Where's
do you
the
not
Soviet
understand
Union?
it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border, while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. What I can tell you, is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive
Fair
alliance.
enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a
It
fact.
has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But
And so
there's
the
no reason
reason-
for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile, a threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, man.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
Yeah, he is.
That's exactly what Hegel
We're
said.
blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the
Okay,
security
which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member. Which is not a NATO member.
I see to you
Other
on that
countries
point.
feel threatened.
Nothing